What decision will haunt you for the rest of your life? 10 minutes after drinking my second vodka tonic, I felt way more drunk than I should from 2 drinks. My head was heavy and my words started to slur. Derek, the kind stranger who'd bought me the drink, asked if I was okay. When I said I felt dizzy and that maybe I hadn't eaten enough, he suggested some water. He ordered it from the bartender again, but when I drank it, the dizzy feeling got worse instead of better. The light seemed too bright suddenly, and when I tried to focus on Derek's face, it kept sliding out of focus. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd just drunk too fast. Derek moved closer, putting his hand on my lower back to steady me, and said maybe I needed some fresh air. I said no, I was fine. But my tongue felt thick, and the words came out slurred. That's when I knew something was really wrong. I tried to stand up to go to the bathroom, but my legs were like jelly, and Derek caught me, his hands gripping my arms too tight, saying, "Careful there. Looks like someone can't handle their liquor." His smile was different now, satisfied, like something was going according to plan. The bartender glanced over but just saw what looked like a drunk girl with her boyfriend. I tried to say I needed help, but it came out as mumbling, and Derek laughed loudly, performatively, telling the bartender, "She's had a few too many, I better get her home." The bartender nodded and turned away, and I wanted to scream that this wasn't my boyfriend, that something was wrong, but my mouth wouldn't work right. My tongue felt huge and numb in my mouth. Derek's arm was around my waist now, practically holding me up, his fingers digging into my ribs, and he started walking me toward the door. I tried to resist, but my muscles weren't responding properly, like the connection between my brain and body was severed, and he was so much stronger. My feet were dragging, and he was basically carrying my weight. My vision was starting to tunnel and blur at the edges, darkness creeping in from the sides. Everything was happening in slow motion, but also too fast. We passed a table of women, and I tried to catch their eye, tried to mouth help, focusing all my energy on making my face work. But Derek said cheerfully, "Sorry, ladies, girlfriend had too much." And they just smiled sympathetically. One of them said, "Been there, girl," and laughed, and I wanted to cry because they had no idea what was happening. My phone was in my purse, and I tried to reach for it, but my hands were too clumsy, fingers not closing right, and Derek took my purse, saying, "I've got it, baby, don't worry." The way he said baby made bile rise in my throat. He was steering me through the crowd now, and people were stepping aside, seeing what they expected to see, just another drunk girl being taken home. I tried to grab onto a chair as we passed, but my fingers wouldn't grip. Derek noticed and pulled me harder, whispering in my ear, "Stop making a scene or this gets worse." The cool air outside hit me, and for a second I felt more alert, the shock of temperature change clearing my head slightly. But then the dizziness crashed over me worse than before. My knees buckled and Derek held me up, making it look caring, but his grip was bruising my arm. He was walking me away from the bar toward the parking lot, and I tried to pull away, but it was like moving through thick syrup, every movement taking enormous effort. My legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. He kept talking in this calm, friendly voice loud enough for others to hear, saying, "My car's right over here. I'll get you home safe. You just had too much." I could see people on the street, but when I tried to call out, only a weak mumble came out. A group of guys walked past, and I managed to grab one sleeve, but Derek quickly said, "Sorry, man. Girlfriend gets handsy when she's drunk." And the guy laughed and pulled away from me. Derek told a couple walking by, "Too many birthday shots." And they laughed and kept walking while I tried to shake my head no. Tried to make them see. My legs were barely working now, and Derek was essentially carrying me, my feet dragging on the pavement. I could feel my heart racing, but my body wouldn't respond to the panic. I could see his car getting closer, a dark SUV parked in the shadows at the back of the lot where no cameras would reach. My vision was going in and out, like someone was flipping a light switch, and I couldn't feel my feet anymore. Everything below my knees was numb. Derek was saying something about how I'd feel better soon, how he had water in his car, how he'd take good care of me, how I was exactly his type. We were at his car now, and he was opening the back door, not the passenger door, the back where no one would see me, where I'd be lying down, trapped. The interior was dark and looked like a mouth waiting to swallow me. I tried one more time to scream, but nothing came out except a whimper. He was lifting me into the car, arranging my limp body on the seat, and I couldn't fight him, couldn't move, could barely keep my eyes open. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was Derek saying, "Don't worry, it'll all be over soon." My eyes opened to spinning darkness and a cold, hard surface pressing against my cheek. The ceiling fan above me turned in slow circles, each blade catching morning light that stabbed through my skull like needles. My mouth tasted like metal and something chemical, my tongue too big and dry against my teeth. I tried to lift my head, but it weighed 100 pounds, and the movement made my stomach roll. The floor under me was tile, white bathroom tile with little black specks, and I could see the base of a toilet nearby. My arms were twisted under me at weird angles, and when I tried to move them, pins and needles shot through both hands. Something was wrong with my shirt. The buttons were off by one, and the fabric was bunched up around my ribs. My jeans were still on, but the zipper was halfway down, and one leg was pushed up to my knee. I forced my hand to move, to check, and felt relief when I found my underwear was still in place even though everything else was messed up. My hair was stuck to my face with what felt like dried spit or vomit, and when I pushed it away, my fingers came back with traces of mascara. Through the open bathroom door, I could hear Derek's voice. Not close, but maybe in another room, talking on the phone about having to deal with something unexpected. He said he needed to clean up before anyone noticed and that he'd handle it like last time. My body went cold at those words, and suddenly my brain snapped into focus, even though my limbs still felt like wet cement. I had to get out before he came back to finish whatever he'd started. The bathroom had 2 doors, one leading toward his voice, and another that looked like it might go outside or to a hallway. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't hold me, so I started crawling, dragging myself across the tile with my elbows while my knees scraped behind me. Every movement took forever, and I could hear my own breathing, too loud and raspy in the quiet house. The door handle was too high to reach from the floor, so I used the wall to pull myself up enough to turn it. The door opened into a laundry room with another door that had a window showing daylight and what looked like a backyard. Derek's voice got louder for a second, and I heard him say he'd call back in an hour after he took care of things. My fingers fumbled with the deadbolt on the back door, missing it twice before managing to turn it, and then I was outside in grass that was wet with morning dew. The cold air hit my bare feet, and I realized my shoes were gone, but I didn't care. I just started moving away from the house. My legs worked better now, but still felt like rubber, and I had to use fences and walls to stay upright as I stumbled between houses. I didn't recognize the neighborhood at all, just rows of similar-looking houses with neat lawns and no people visible anywhere. A dog started barking as I passed one yard, and I tried to run but only managed a weird shuffling walk. My vision kept going fuzzy at the edges, and I had to stop every few steps to keep from falling over. Finally, I saw a busier street ahead with actual traffic, and I pushed myself toward it, my feet leaving bloody prints on the sidewalk from stepping on something sharp. A woman walking a small white dog came around the corner and stopped dead when she saw me. I tried to say help, but it came out as a croak, and then my legs gave out completely and I went down hard on the concrete. The woman dropped the leash and ran to me, already pulling out her phone, asking what happened while she dialed 911. I managed to say drugged and the name Derek before everything started spinning again. The woman stayed with me, telling the operator we needed an ambulance immediately, giving the street names while her dog sniffed at my hair. Sirens came fast, or maybe it just seemed fast because time wasn't working right in my head. The paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher and started asking questions I could barely process. They wanted to know what I took, how much I drank, if I knew where I was. I told them about the bar and Derek buying my drinks and then waking up in the bathroom, but the words came out jumbled and wrong. They put an IV in my arm and kept checking my pupils with a light while we drove. One of them found my phone in my pocket, screen cracked but still working, and asked who they should call. I gave them Cameron's number and they used their radio to have someone contact her. At the hospital, they wheeled me straight back to a room and a nurse started taking my vitals while asking more questions. They wanted my clothes for evidence and gave me a hospital gown that felt like paper against my skin. Cameron burst through the door about an hour later, her hair messy like she'd just woken up, and grabbed my hand so tight it hurt. The ER doctor came in and explained they needed to do an exam to collect evidence and document injuries. Cameron's face went pale, but she nodded and said she'd stay with me through everything. The exam was awful, with the nurse taking pictures of bruises on my arms where Derek had grabbed me, and more on my ribs from his fingers. They used special swabs and put everything in labeled bags while explaining each step in a gentle voice. A detective named Nathan Briggs showed up while they were finishing and introduced himself as the one assigned to my case. He had a notebook and wrote down everything I could remember about the car, trying to piece together the route Derek took and details about the house. The toxicology screen came back negative for the common drugs they test for, and Nathan explained that GHB leaves the system fast. He said they'd do a hair test in a few weeks that might show something, but I could tell he was worried about proving what happened. Cameron went into full investigation mode after that, taking her friend who knew about computers back to the bar. They talked the manager into checking the security footage and found Derek on camera at the bar, clearly showing him buying my drinks. Back at our apartment, I couldn't sleep at all, checking the locks every few minutes and jumping when the heater kicked on. Cameron dragged her mattress into my room and set up her laptop with some kind of security program that would alert us if anyone tried the doors. The next morning, my phone rang while I was staring at my coffee, unable to drink it. Nathan's voice was steady when he told me they'd tracked down the guy from the bar footage. His name was Derek Holbrook, and he'd paid with a credit card, which made finding him easy. The worst part was when Nathan said Derek had no criminal record at all. My stomach turned because that meant he'd probably done this before and just never got caught. 2 days later, a woman from Victim Services came to the apartment with a folder full of papers. She sat at our kitchen table and walked me through what would happen next in the legal system. She helped me fill out forms for a restraining order and gave me the number for a therapist who worked with people who'd been through stuff like this. The paperwork took forever, and my hand kept shaking while I wrote. That night, I was lying in bed when something clicked in my brain about the car ride. I remembered grabbing at Derek's ear when he was putting me in the SUV and feeling my earring come off. I'd pushed it down into the seat crack with my fingers before passing out completely. I called Nathan right away, even though it was past midnight, and told him about the earring. He said that detail could help them get a warrant to search Derek's vehicle since they already had the bar footage showing him leaving with me. Cameron spent the whole next day on her laptop searching local Facebook groups and community pages. She found 2 posts from different women describing a guy who looked just like Derek who'd bought them drinks at bars in the same area. One woman named Freya had written a really detailed post about waking up confused with gaps in her memory after meeting a friendly guy at a bar. Nathan contacted both women through the police department's official channels, and Freya agreed to come in and give a statement. 3 weeks after the attack, the hair follicle test results finally came back from the lab. The test showed GHB metabolites in my hair from the exact time frame of that night at the bar. A prosecutor named Valentina called me herself to explain that this evidence made the case much stronger. Her voice was confident when she said they could prove I'd been drugged without my knowledge. But then Derek hired a lawyer named Jace who started telling everyone his client was just trying to help a drunk woman. The lawyer claimed I'd been willing to go home with Derek and that he was being a gentleman by taking care of me. Reading his statement in the newspaper made me throw up in the bathroom while Cameron held my hair back. Valentina called again and warned me this was normal defense strategy and not to let it get to me. A week later, Nathan called with good news about the search warrant. They'd found my earring exactly where I said it would be wedged deep under the back seat of Derek's SUV. The crime scene photos showed it pushed so far into the seat crack that it couldn't have gotten there by accident. Nathan said this proved I'd been in his vehicle, and that my memory of that detail was accurate. The victim advocate arranged for me to meet Freya at her office downtown. We sat in uncomfortable chairs drinking bad coffee while comparing what happened to us. The similarities made my skin crawl because it was the same pattern every time. Same type of bar in the same area of town. Same friendly approach in buying drinks. Same dark SUV parked away from cameras. Same gaps in memory and waking up confused. Freya grabbed my hand when she talked about the shame she felt for months thinking she'd just drunk too much. A detective who worked with computers called Nathan while we were still at the advocate's office. They'd gotten into Derek's cloud storage with a warrant and found deleted videos on his account. Nathan's voice was tight when he told us the videos showed other women who were clearly unconscious. Valentina called an emergency meeting that afternoon and said this discovery changed everything. They were building a much bigger case now with multiple victims over several years. The prosecutor's office was bringing in extra resources and treating this as a serial predator investigation. Then Nathan got a call from Bradley, who'd been working the bar that night. Bradley remembered seeing Derek lean over my drink when I'd turned to look at something. He hadn't thought much about it at the time, but now he was sure he saw Derek drop something into my glass. Bradley came to the station that day to give an official statement about what he'd witnessed. His description matched exactly with when I'd started feeling dizzy and confused at the bar. 2 days later, Nathan called me at work to say they were arresting Derek that afternoon. I left my desk immediately and drove to the police station where Nathan showed me the arrest plan on his computer screen. They'd tracked Derek to his job at a tech company downtown and planned to take him there instead of at his house. Nathan said public arrests sent a message and made it harder for suspects to destroy evidence. I watched the live feed from a patrol car's dash cam as 3 police cars pulled up to the glass office building at exactly 2:30 p.m. Officers walked through the lobby past the confused receptionist who stood up from her desk. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt like it took forever, even though I was just watching a screen. When the doors opened, Derek was standing at a whiteboard presenting to a room full of colleagues through a glass conference room wall. The officers knocked and Derek turned with this annoyed expression that changed to shock when he saw the badges. His coworkers all stood up as the officers entered and one started recording with his phone. Nathan turned up the audio so I could hear the officer reading Derek his rights while his hands were cuffed behind his back. Derek kept saying there must be some mistake and asking if he could call his lawyer. His boss came out of another office demanding to know what was happening. The officer told him Derek was under arrest for multiple counts of kidnapping and sexual assault. Everyone in the office stopped working and stared as they walked Derek past all the cubicles to the elevator. By 6 o'clock that night, the arrest was on every local news channel. The reporters called him a suspected serial predator and showed his employee photo from the company website. My phone started buzzing nonstop with texts and calls from people who recognized him. Old college friends messaged asking if I was okay, because they'd heard rumors something happened to me. Coworkers who didn't know why I'd been out sick suddenly understood. My aunt called crying because she'd seen it on Facebook. The next morning was Derek's bail hearing at the courthouse downtown. I sat in the back row between Cameron and Nathan watching Derek in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. His parents were in the front row and his mother kept dabbing her eyes with tissues. The prosecutor stood up and described Derek as an extreme flight risk with financial resources and connections in other states. She detailed the evidence against him, including the GHB in my system and multiple victims coming forward. Derek's lawyer argued for reasonable bail, saying his client had no prior record and strong community ties. The judge set bail at $500,000, citing the serious nature of the charges and the risk to public safety. Derek's parents whispered to each other, then nodded to the lawyer who said they would post bond. The judge ordered Derek to surrender his passport and wear an ankle monitor with GPS tracking. He couldn't leave the county or have any contact with victims or witnesses. 2 weeks after the arrest, I tried going back to my office job, but couldn't focus on spreadsheets and emails. Walking through the parking garage to my car triggered a panic attack that left me hyperventilating against a concrete pillar. The fluorescent lights reminded me of the bar, and every man in a suit looked like Derek from behind. My supervisor found me crying in the bathroom after a meeting and suggested I work from home for a while. She set me up with remote access to everything and said to take whatever time I needed. I started working from my bedroom with Cameron checking on me between her own shifts. 3 days into working from home, Nathan called with news about more evidence. The owner of a bakery near the bar had seen the news coverage and remembered she had security cameras facing the street. She'd gone through her footage from that night and found Derek's SUV driving past at 11:47 p.m. The timestamp matched when he would have been taking me to his house based on when I'd escaped. Nathan sent me a screenshot from the video and I could see my silhouette slumped against the back window. The image made me sick. but also validated that my memories were real. Cameron took over managing my daily life when she saw I wasn't eating or sleeping properly. She organized our friends into shifts so someone was always available if I needed them. Her friend Sarah came over Tuesday mornings with coffee and stayed while Cameron went to class. Another friend named Alan took Thursday afternoons and helped me organize the victim advocacy paperwork. Cameron's boyfriend picked up my prescriptions and groceries so I didn't have to leave the apartment. They created a group text to coordinate who was bringing dinner each night. The fierce protectiveness of this makeshift family made me feel less alone as the legal process dragged on. After Derek's arrest made the news more, women started contacting the prosecutor's office. Valentina called to tell me 2 more victims had come forward that week with similar stories. By the end of the month, 7 women total had made reports spanning 3 years. Each one described the same pattern of meeting Derek at bars in the same part of town. Same friendly approach and buying drinks. Same dark SUV. Same gaps in memory. Valentina said this established a clear predatory pattern that would strengthen all our cases. The therapy sessions Valentina recommended started 3 weeks after the arrest. The therapist specialized in trauma recovery and had a small office with soft lighting and plants everywhere. The first session I could barely speak through the crying. She didn't push me to talk about that night right away. Instead, we talked about why I felt guilty for accepting a drink from a stranger. The second session was harder when she asked me to describe what I remembered without judging myself. I threw up in her bathroom afterward. By the 4th session, I could talk about it without completely breaking down. A month after the arrest, Derek's defense team filed a stack of motions with the court. They claimed the search of his car was improper because the warrant was based on unreliable witness testimony. They said the GHB evidence was inconclusive because the test was done too late. They wanted all the video evidence thrown out, claiming it was obtained without proper chain of custody. Valentina called me after spending all night writing responses to each motion. She filed counter-arguments with case law and precedents showing everything was done correctly. The hearing on the motions lasted 3 hours with both sides arguing. The judge denied every single defense motion, saying the evidence was properly obtained and admissible. 5 weeks after the arrest, Nathan called about a new witness. Derek's neighbor had seen the news coverage and realized she might have important information. The woman lived 2 houses down and remembered seeing Derek carry what looked like a drunk woman into his house 6 months earlier. She'd assumed it was his girlfriend who'd had too much to drink at dinner. She remembered thinking it was sweet how he was taking care of her. Now she realized what she'd actually witnessed and felt sick about not calling anyone. She gave a sworn statement to Nathan describing everything she saw that night, including the woman's limp arms and Derek's hurried movements. 2 months after the arrest, the grand jury convened to review all the evidence. Valentina presented everything, including the test results, witness statements, video footage, and victim testimonies. The grand jury indicted Derek on 7 counts of kidnapping, 7 counts of sexual assault, and 7 counts of administering controlled substances without consent. Valentina called me afterward and explained the charges meant Derek was facing 25 years to life if convicted on all counts. She said the multiple victims and pattern of behavior made it very unlikely he'd get a light sentence. The upcoming trial would be brutal, but she was confident we had an overwhelming case against him. 3 weeks later, I sat in a conference room across from Jace McCullough for my deposition. He started asking about what I'd had to eat that day, how much sleep I'd gotten the night before, whether I'd been on any medications. His questions got more aggressive as he picked apart every single detail I remembered. He wanted to know exactly how many seconds it took Derek to walk me to the door, the exact words the other people in the bar said, whether Derek's hand was on my left side or right side when he held me up. When I couldn't remember if the couple outside was walking a dog or not, he acted like that meant I couldn't remember anything. My voice started shaking when he asked why I'd accepted drinks from a stranger in the first place. Valentina put her hand on my arm and told me to take my time. Jace kept pushing, asking if maybe I'd been flirting with Derek earlier, if maybe I'd wanted to go home with him and changed my mind. I started crying when he suggested I might have just been embarrassed about being drunk in public. Valentina called for a break and coached me in the hallway, reminding me to stick to the facts and not let him twist my words. When we went back in, I answered every question clearly, even though my hands were shaking. I didn't back down when he tried to confuse me about the timeline. The deposition lasted 4 hours, and I threw up in the parking garage afterward. 2 days later, Cameron showed up at our apartment with boxes and packing tape. She'd found me a new place closer to campus with better locks and a doorman who checked IDs. We spent the weekend moving my stuff, and she helped me set up 3 different locks on the new door. The apartment didn't have any memories attached to it. No corners where I'd cried or windows I'd stared out of unable to sleep. I still checked every lock 3 times before bed and woke up most nights from nightmares, but the fresh start helped. Cameron stayed over the first week to make sure I felt safe. She set up motion sensors that would alert my phone if anyone came near my door. A month after moving, Nathan called with urgent news. Derek had created a fake Instagram account and messaged another one of his victims, asking her not to testify. The woman, smart and brave, screenshot everything and sent it straight to Nathan instead of responding. Derek's message said he was sorry for what happened and that testifying would just hurt everyone involved. Nathan got a warrant for the fake account and traced it back to Derek's laptop through the IP address. The judge revoked his bail immediately since contacting victims violated his release conditions. Derek was arrested at his parents' house and taken to county jail to wait for trial. For the first time since the attack, I slept through a whole night without waking up in a panic. Knowing he was locked up, that he couldn't show up at my door or follow me somewhere, made my body finally relax a little. The forensic analyst finished going through Derek's computer, and what they found made everyone in Valentina's office sick. He had hundreds of searches about GHB, how much to use based on body weight, how long it stayed in someone's system, what tests could detect it. There were spreadsheets with women's names, which bars they went to, what they drank, who their friends were. My name was on there from 2 weeks before he drugged me, with notes about my work schedule and that I usually came to that bar on Fridays. He'd been watching me, planning it, waiting for the right moment. The spreadsheets went back 3 years and had over 40 names on them. Some had check marks next to them. Valentina said this proved it wasn't a crime of opportunity but methodical predation. She offered Derek a plea deal the next week. 15 years in prison if he admitted guilt and registered as a sex offender for life. His lawyer rejected it within 2 days, saying they were confident they could win at trial. Valentina wasn't surprised and said defense lawyers often gambled even with overwhelming evidence against their clients. She started preparing even harder for trial, bringing in expert witnesses about GHB and predatory behavior patterns. Meanwhile, I started going to a support group at the crisis center every Wednesday night. There were 8 of us in the group, all at different stages of recovery. Some were years past their attacks, others just weeks. We sat in a circle in a small room with soft chairs and talked about everything from nightmares to dating again, to dealing with family who didn't understand. Hearing other women share stories so similar to mine made me feel less alone. One woman talked about how she still couldn't go to bars 5 years later. Another shared how she'd testified at trial and felt powerful taking back control. I cried through most of the first 3 meetings but kept going back. The trial date got set for 6 months after the attack, which felt both too soon and too far away. Valentina met with me every week to prepare for testifying. She explained how Jace would try to confuse me on the stand, make me doubt my own memories, suggest I was wrong about details. We practiced with her assistant playing defense attorney, throwing horrible questions at me until I could answer without breaking down. She taught me to pause before answering, to ask for clarification if I didn't understand, to say, I don't recall, instead of guessing about details I wasn't sure about. 2 weeks before the trial date, Jace McCullough called Valentina with a new offer. Derek would plead guilty to reduced charges and take 12 years if we avoided trial. Jace claimed his client wanted to spare the victims from having to testify and relive their trauma. Valentina said it was really because they knew they'd lose at trial and were trying to get a lighter sentence. She called all 7 of us to discuss the offer. We met at Freya's apartment on a Saturday afternoon, sitting around her living room with coffee and tissues. Each woman shared her thoughts about testifying versus taking the plea. Some wanted their day in court, to look Derek in the eye and tell everyone what he did. Others just wanted it over with and didn't care about the extra 3 years. We talked for 3 hours about what mattered most. In the end, we agreed that making him admit guilt publicly and ensuring he'd be registered as a sex offender was more important than the possibility of a few extra years. The plea hearing happened on a Tuesday morning in a packed courtroom. Derek stood in his orange jumpsuit and had to say out loud what he'd done. The judge made him be specific, admitting to drugging 7 women with GHB, kidnapping them, and intending to sexually assault them. His voice was flat and emotionless, like he was reading a grocery list. He never looked at any of us sitting in the gallery. But hearing him say the words, admitting that he'd drugged me, that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't imagined it or overreacted, gave me something I didn't know I needed. Validation from the person who'd tried to gaslight me into thinking I just had too much to drink. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later, and all 7 of us had to give victim impact statements. I stood at the podium with my typed pages shaking in my hands, looking straight at Derek while I read about the panic attacks that hit me in grocery stores, the way I couldn't sleep without checking my door locks 5 times, how I'd thrown away every piece of clothing I owned that looked like what I wore that night. His parents sat behind him crying, but I felt nothing for them. Not when their son sat there with that same blank expression like we were talking about parking tickets instead of destroyed lives. The judge took 20 minutes before coming back with the sentence, and those were the longest 20 minutes of my life, all of us holding hands in the gallery row. 12 years with no chance of early release, lifetime registration as a sex offender, and he had to pay for all our therapy costs going forward. Derek's mom let out this wail when the judge read it, but I just felt relief that he couldn't do this to anyone else for over a decade. After they led him away in cuffs, Valentina gathered us all outside the courthouse, and Freya suggested we go to her house for dinner since none of us wanted to be alone right then. Her apartment was small, but all 7 of us fit around her dining table with Chinese takeout spread everywhere. And we actually laughed for the first time in months, sharing stories about the weird things we'd done to feel safe again, like carrying pepper spray in our own homes, or sleeping with kitchen knives under our pillows. We exchanged phone numbers and made a group chat called The Survivors, which sounds cheesy, but it helped knowing I could text them at 3 a.m. when the nightmares hit. 3 months after sentencing, I realized I'd slept through 5 nights straight without waking up in a cold sweat or taking the sleeping pills my doctor prescribed. The nightmares still came sometimes, but I'd learned this breathing technique in therapy, where I counted backwards from 100 while picturing myself somewhere safe, and it actually worked most nights. Cameron signed us both up to volunteer with the campus safety organization, and we spent Tuesday evenings teaching other students how to watch their drinks, how to spot someone who might be drugged, what to do if your friend seems too drunk too fast. I'd stand in front of these rooms full of 19-year-olds and tell them my story, and watch their faces change from bored to shocked, too determined not to let it happen to them or their friends. 6 months after the trial, Nathan called me out of the blue to tell me Derek had been attacked by another inmate and was in protective custody now, spending 23 hours a day in a cell by himself. I waited to feel something. Anything. But there was just emptiness where my anger used to be. Like he'd become irrelevant to my life even though his actions shaped everything about it now. Cameron introduced me to this guy from her economics class who knew about what happened to me, but didn't treat me like I was made of glass. We went for coffee first, then lunch, then actual dinner dates where he let me pick the restaurant, and always made sure I sat facing the door because he'd noticed that made me more comfortable without me having to explain. He never pushed for anything physical, letting me reach for his hand first after 2 months of dating, waiting for me to initiate our first kiss after 3 months, never making me feel broken for needing things to go slow. The bar where it happened made all these changes after our case got media attention, installing drink testing kits at every table, training their staff to spot signs of drugging, putting up signs in the bathrooms with the number for a safe ride service. They added cameras covering every inch of the parking lot too after people online dragged them for having blind spots where Derek's car was parked. A year after the attack, I walked into my therapist's office, and she said we could move to monthly sessions instead of weekly, because I'd made so much progress with my coping strategies. I'd gone from barely able to leave my apartment to living an almost normal life again, though normal now included constant awareness of my surroundings and never accepting drinks from anyone. Freya called me with this idea about starting a nonprofit to help other survivors deal with the legal system, since we'd both struggled so much with understanding the process and knowing our rights. We found this small office space downtown that a women's foundation helped us pay for, and spent weekends setting up desks and filing systems, creating resource packets for women going through what we went through. We held our first support group meeting the following week, with just 3 women who'd found us through word of mouth, sitting in folding chairs we'd bought from a thrift store, while I passed around homemade cookies and tried not to let my hands shake. My boyfriend picked me up after that meeting and noticed I'd been crying but didn't push when I said it was good tears, just drove us to get ice cream and let me eat it in comfortable silence. 6 months into dating, he asked if I wanted to look at apartments together, and I surprised myself by saying yes. Then spent the next week making lists of security features I needed, like deadbolts and window locks and a doorman if possible. We found a place on the 3rd floor with good lighting in the hallways and neighbors who actually looked up when you walked by, and the first night there, I slept through until morning without waking up to check the locks even once. The nonprofit grew faster than we expected when a local news station did a piece on us, and suddenly we had 20 women calling for help navigating police reports and court dates and victim compensation forms. Each woman who walked through our door reminded me why this work mattered, like the college student who cried. When I explained she wasn't crazy for not remembering everything perfectly, or the mother of 2 who thought no one would believe her because she'd been drinking. My boyfriend proposed on a random Tuesday while we were cooking dinner, getting down on one knee right there in our tiny kitchen with pasta boiling over on the stove behind him. 2 years had passed since Derek's sentencing, when I opened my email to find an acceptance letter from the law school downtown, with a full scholarship designated for survivors of violent crimes. Valentina wrote me a recommendation letter that made me sob at my desk, and Nathan sent a congratulations card with a note saying the prosecutor's office needed more people who understood what victims really needed. Cameron called me screaming with excitement about her own engagement, and before I could even process it, she was asking me to be her maid of honor, saying she couldn't imagine anyone else standing next to her. Her bachelorette party was at a wine bar downtown, and I nursed the same glass of water all night while the other girls got tipsy. But I actually had fun watching Cameron open embarrassing gifts and hearing stories about her fiancé's terrible dancing. The letter from the parole board came 3 years after Derek went to prison, requesting victim impact statements for his first eligibility hearing. All 7 of us wrote letters describing the ongoing effects of his crimes, the therapy bills, the nightmares, the way we still looked over our shoulders in parking lots. The board denied his request in less than 5 minutes of deliberation, noting his continued refusal to take responsibility and the calculating nature of his systematic predation. My wedding was small, just 40 people in a garden with Cameron standing beside me, and Freya reading a poem about survival and new beginnings. Valentina sat in the front row next to Nathan and his wife, and seeing them there felt like having my chosen family witness this next chapter. The grant application Freya and I had worked on for months finally came through with enough funding to hire 3 full-time advocates and expand our services across the state. We'd helped over 200 women by then, changing how multiple counties handled drugging cases and getting 3 other bars to implement the safety protocols that might have saved me. 5 years after that night at the bar, I was sitting in my bathroom staring at a positive pregnancy test while my husband held my hand. The fear was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by genuine excitement about bringing a child into a world where I finally felt safe enough to protect them. The decision that haunts me now isn't taking that drink from Derek. It's all the times before that night, when my gut told me something was off with a guy and I was ignored it, told myself I was being paranoid or rude or difficult, because that's what we're taught to do instead of trusting ourselves. Well, folks, that's it from me today. Thanks for sticking with me and letting me throw my thoughts and questions out there along the way. I really appreciate it. Like the video, it helps more than you think.